my mind about contacting him and asking if he would come, because I knew that there would be an interest. But not until a few months ago did I finally get up the courage to call. And I called, and before I hardly got it out of my mouth, what I wanted, he said, when is it? I said, and he said, I'll be there because I'm coming again the last part of September. Talk about how we're together. I'm so happy to see you again and introduce you to Stewart Rafert.
I'm glad to see such a big crowd today, and I'm going to talk on this level, and if somebody has trouble hearing, I've got a microphone over here I can use. So into my nap time and my voice drops down, you got to wave your hand and I'll pick up the microphone. I told Jean when she called, I was so delighted to hear this. I work so much on old Miami records, and this courthouse up the it's about the same. The county hasn't grown a huge amount of population, so a lot of the old records are just where they always were. I was really interested in land records, and the Miami, as you know, had land grants up and down the Wabash River, and of course there was a big reservation in the southern part of the county down in Grant County. So when I started my doctoral research ago, one question was, what happened to the Miami land? I know it was lost, but how did it get lost and what went on? I found orphans records there at the courthouse, which were really good because the Miamis were not citizens and they could not represent themselves in court or anything. So they had to have a local lawyer and manage their affairs. And that was kind of a catastrophe because some of the lawyers took advantage of that situation and managed a lot of Miami land. So anyway, I was in the courthouse so much. Some people here worked there. They told me everything. Stuff like that. At the same time, we're talking History Hunters Luncheon because I really didn't know very much about what I was doing. It was on the job. And I remember starting out, one of my cousins married a Miami Indian guy back in the late 70s. His name was Mike Halliburton. And curious about the tribe and communities and all these changes. And Mike said, well, I'll take you up to meet Grandma in Peru. So we went up to Peru to Fort Graham Street, and a little lady about this tall came to the door, very dark skinned, and herself, her name was Swan Hunter, and I asked her about her name Swan, and she said, well, my Miami name is that means white swan. And I said, wow, that's really cool. And then we were chatting a little bit, and she said, we Miami are just like everyone else. And my heart just fell to the ground because I thought, my goodness, if just like everyone else, what is there to study? Then she said, go visit my nephew, Oliver Godfrey. She said, visit Oliver Roy, and he can tell you something. So that very afternoon, Mike Halliburton went over to Godfrey's place, and he was a passionate Miami nationalist. And the Miamis at that time in India were full of claims against the federal government. We all know all the treaties were broken, 300 federal treaties with Indian tribes, and every one of them was broken. But after World War II, the government, we will try to correct this situation, and we will allow experts to study tribes and treaties, and we will give awards to the tribes. So that was before time, but the Miami 1960s were deeply involved in the claims process, and they had a lot of work. They had to make tribal contract with attorneys. They had to make trips to Washington, D.C. Miami went to Oklahoma, Miami, Oklahoma, which is named for one of the chiefs from here, and talked to the Miami down there and work things out. And the way it happened, both tribes were recognized as tribes, and that went forward for many, many years. Congress was very slow to appropriate the money and so on. In a way, the claim sounded like a lot of money when they were divided among the tribes. It was a small amount of money that was useful for maybe some education or a down payment on a house. So anyway, I came in at the very end of the claims process, and the idea of federal recognition was starting. So I was just was hearing. I was talking to Miami, say this, and it was fascinating. So I thought, well, I've got something to work with. The Miamis do have some to talk about. And indeed, many of the Miami people were passionate about their Indian life, about their history, about places around the county and so on that were special. And, learning more and more, and the process has never stopped. I was also working with a PhD student in sociology, and how the United States government decides who is an Indian. The federal definitions of Indian: agriculture department, military. There are over 100 definitions within the federal government. In terms of recognition to tribes, that's a whole different thing. And to do these, of course, and all sorts of other. Yes, I could say that ever since I met Wabash or Swan Hunter back in, I believe it was 1977, I've never stopped doing tribal and Miami business. There is so much to do. I've always enjoyed working with the Miami people. They are direct. They know their history well. They are passionate about certain things. There is anger over things. There's also many times a sense, a non-judgmental attitude, very helpful, and a great sense of humor. And I might tell one or two jokes along those lines as we go along. I also want to encourage you to look at the museum. I took early this morning, and it's just amazing. I love this section up there. My dad was a motorcyclist his whole life, and it's just amazing. Harley up there, and it goes on. But of course, there's a lot of other Indian objects around. There's a Francis Slocum blanket upstairs. It's been restored, original English, and with the silk ribbon work on it, and so.
Stewart, we brought it downstairs. It's just outside the door.
They brought it down. It's on wheels, and if you, my eyes aren't that good, but if you look up close, the stitch work on it. So, and I do need to put in a plug, if I may, Tracy, for the we were talking. The Georgia Museum in Indianapolis is a museum united with the Smithsonian made a direct to, and they are Miami ribbon work and some other objects on base permanent loan to the Idle Georgia in Indianapolis. And you've got to give the Idle Georgia credit. Got this done. You know, the federal bureaucracy and all that stuff is amazing, and plus the value of the objects and the transportation. So I want to thank, of course, the people. I want to thank the Miami people for what they gave me, and I found that didn't know something, ask a question, I would get an answer at a time, or I might not get an answer until later on. I had to think about things a little bit. But the Miami people, the Army, from combat, Vietnam War, a very angry, so on. Once they Miami, they helped heal me. I want to thank them for the healing that they gave me as well. It's been a wonderful, gifted process, and I've always treasured. Yes, Indian or Native American, people always ask Native American, and I've got the two. This is, of course, Miami Indian tribal history, and the Miami refer to themselves as Miami or Indian. But here's a little book that I wrote with a professor from a couple of years ago, the Native Americans. And this is called Native Americans because it gets into urban Indians and people who may not have it, and so on. So what I'm saying is either Indian or Native American is Indians tend to use the term or the tribal name Cherokee or Navajo. Many Indians are working in cities, are professional, lots of education and so on, and they may choose the term Native American. So you can use and that's what the people tell me. How do you do history? start out with history? Does they have an idea? I start researching history.
Get a bid before it.
Yes, that's right. Just to have some questions. To have questions. Bigger the my question about the Miami people was, they survived this time when every prediction was that the Miami would appear from the face. They would lose their identity, they would blend in, they would whatever. And yet here they are today, 30 years ago when I started, 1900, 1800, so on back centuries. So big question, how have the Miami people persisted? How they in a strong they are in many different ways, and I just expand the special places, the words and the language itself, and on. Not anything, but my point is, you've got to have a good question, and once you've got a good question in your mind, that's the fun part. History, okay. School type where you're writing down dates. I'm so now, another question, communities. Now, this could be how do communities stay together. You've got a community in Wabash County here. It's obviously dynamic and interesting and complicated. How do communities? Museums are part of it, aren't they? Education is part of it. Storytelling is part of it. You just have this piece of paper. 100 years from now will be so interesting. So, in the United States, our communities are the bedrock of our country. Our communities are what keep the country. Through education and history, we can bring it together so we're not arguing about things we have in common. And I think that's a healing when it's done right. It's not thinking a way of pulling people apart. It can help break that. So, with people, and I mentioned Swan Hunter and going on to many others who are gone. I'm going to show you now that we made for the audio back in about 1998 film, but I want to use this and the item we have to leave because I want these Miami elders themselves and Miami people who are here today. These people were the spirit tribe. They defined what it was to be a Miami Indian. And my sadness is it's passed on over the years. I think what we'll do now, film about, and then maybe if you have some questions, and then we'll do a little bit more talking. Okay. I'm going to
My name is Oliver Zeebody, and I'm the great-great-grandson of Francis Slocum. And my name is Pepinzish, which means my mother was Dutch, but that doesn't make me Indian. I mean, I was full-blood, considered full. He was 3/4, a little over 3, hunting with him and things like that. But he taught me how to live with a knife, in the woods and make things, and snares. And we spent a lot of time, he'd say things in Indian to me and tell me the old ways. There's an old saying my dad told me, Ki Shiriwa, that means just the roots or it's like we just mean somebody turned loose the animals.
I mean, the white people are coming?
Yeah, yeah.
They had pageants down there. They would open the drums, they would dance, and they would chant.
I think the person was to try to pay for some of the attorneys that they hired, even back then, regain our federal recognition. Say, but it was a lot of fun. It was more of a show and tell. The people planting corn and then going out. You had to use a lot of ways. And then, of course, the public would never have been satisfied if you didn't. I remember one time that we had one at Wabash. These real aristocratic women were sitting on the front row and used my Uncle John, who was bald-headed, to be the man to scout. It would be nice to put some ketchup on there, and one of them too realistic for them.
Well, I worked when I was 16 years old, and I worked in a restaurant. I worked at Wabash County Hospital for 20 years. I now work company. My father and my mother were both my. I was a fireman on the Wabash Fire Department, and everybody knew. I had no problem. I was not teased, and I went in the front door of the school. She talked about the house. We would hear stories of my grandfather courting my grandmother there, grapes. As I sat on the porch, there was a grape arbor out front, and Mom talked a lot about going to visit because some of the family lived there afterwards, rented the property. So they would talk about having gatherings, family get-togethers. She just talked of the good times, how it was for our people. Those ties between the children and the grandparents who were still living, that it was important for them to get together. So stories of the grandfathers, they can in turn teach their children. Grandfather Bundy started the first reunion in 1903.
Almost had an of Miami's, and I think what that was our Indian reunion, because at reunion time, all of these men, women, children, aunts, uncles, cousins, the reunions.
Come out of the shadows. The drums can play. Our boys are to sing, and that's very proud.
In 1961, funded the construction on the Mississippi River. A mile-long dam flooded much of Peru and Marion, threatening several Indian home sites and the Bundy or Francis Sloan.
Well, the plans were from the Corps of Engineers, and the government felt that it should cause the access to pipes of the Mississippi. The government can do what they want, and it's very sad to disturb a resting place.
Oh boy, I can remember seeing, the old home place and down Peoria right there. There was a trading post there, and it's not the same. I mean, they even charged me to go in, and I had to go in. If I want to go in and see my own cemetery, unless they go the back way, I have to pay to go through the park.
Yes, have kind of why? Why did they move the presence when they would have to 49 to ever get up to the old cemetery? But the government, no, they would move it, and they moved it in 1994. I spent 5 o'clock in the morning till 5 o'clock at night exhuming the remains. They had these long bars that they would go down and they would strike anything, they would stop and dig. Some of them had nothing there but discoloration of dirt. Then my grandmother, thing was there was her head, and she had long around her head. Every was a place. There wasn't anything disturbed. I picked up her head and felt her hair because I wanted what, and it was just soft. It's just nowadays hair, but underneath was this soft, real soft material.
They can't let hear from. I may die, and my sons made up that they're still going to be on my somewhere. They didn't do a job of us. The Miami adapted to the white people just like he adapted to them. When it got bad, he had to change. You don't really change, I guess, is what I'd say. It's, you throw them a smoke screen, I guess.
Our ancestors has battled with this ever since 1897, that our status is taken away. It's not something that we've tried within 10, 15 years. It's been going on for about 100 years now. We are Miami people. Why not recognize it?
It's not so important to think that, oh, I wish I was Indian, but to say how important it is for you, or you're a German, or whatever your heritage is. That's important to know that and to be proud of that, just proud of being Miami.
That's the film that was made with people, and I remember talking to a judge here in 12 years ago, and about the moving the cemeteries, and he never experienced Miami people because the great Smiley said was really a terrible thing to do. It's an ugly story in this case. Make the remains, as you saw, the 20B and so on. The Miami written records of them, so the names were not placed there. And the image took photographs and collected stuff, but there was no mandate, so they just records down in Louisville, Kentucky after 7 years. Put in certain Army footlockers, which highly. So it was just a very stressful event for people. And this is not ancient history, this is 1964, 1965. As many of you know, a lot of white people lost property and old farms and towns were just lost too. So I'm not saying it's not emotional for everybody. great settlement that's on the history so far. And the thing about Miami history is it's remembered back so far. The story of grandparents to grandchildren down the line many generations. And a lot of the stories survive. Some of the stories are, they are not to be known outside the setting because they are part of Miami. Now, Clarence is a wonderful storyteller, and he told stories that could be circulated. He was in Boy Scout troops and so on in schools many times, and there's a wonderful little collection of his stories, which are it's complicated, and it's ancient, but it's also recent. I think people, and I'm not really speaking for Miami people, but I'm giving my thought that Miami people would want people to be aware of this and to be sensitive to these differences that are just right there. So I don't know if it's okay or not, but does anyone have a question on anything in the film particularly? Yes.
Wasn't in the film there.
Okay, this has a strange and complicated story. The Miami have a treaty of 1841, the Indiana Miami specifically. I'm just going to tell you the way it is. The federal government ruled that they were federally recognized. They had the treaty, they're recognized. The federal court in Chicago ruled the Miami were years of being told, no, you're not recognized. You were recognized tribe. Tribal relations, in other words, tribal government only. You have not maintained tribal relations, so we are turning that we recognize you, and now we're taking it at the same time. You can imagine the reaction. Unbelievable. And again, the executive department, the government presidential part, has recognized Miami through the treaty. And the court system has said, no, you're not recognized, and only Congress can change the treaty relationship. It's in this way. We talk about the government, it's almost like the government's functioning in three different regards here. Congressional separation of powers a little bit too separated. They're not communicating among each other. So these are negative things, very powerful ones, very poignant and very disturbing at times. However, the Miami is a positive. The Miami tribe did many things and has a tribal headquarters in Peru. The tribe being federally recognized is doing many things and has a lot of outreach to the membership. And I might add that the tribe, people wonder, well, how do you decide who's in a tribe? Miami tribe goes federal 1889, 1895, and there are federal roles since then with the claims legislation in 1964, 1970, and that. A whole listing of people who are proven to be of the Miami, and the accepts those people as Miami Indians, okay? And the Miami, I just something here, tribal roll, when it was turned into the Bureau of Indian Affairs in 1993, was so accurate that there's only a question of 7 people out of over 4,000. 7 people were questionable, and the tribe all did not. There's no other tribe that had such an administrative record of people as the Miami in the United States. Okay, and also the Miami correspondence with Washington D.C. back in 1946, voluminous, huge, back and continuing all. So how a federal court in Chicago could say had not kept up tribal relations is a huge puzzle. And I think I mentioned young men at Ohio State. Did I say anything about that? Studied Ohio State outsiders, non-Miami people like myself played a role in this, and it continues on. As I said to the young man yesterday, generation, he's doing his PhD on power relationships between the big society, the American government, and these Indian nations around, of whom there are about 50 that are recognized by the federal government now. The people, the native peoples of Hawaii are just the tip of being recognized as a native people Indian. And I've read federal grants with the administration for Native American in Washington for years. Native American today, I'm back to that term again, Native American not only means Indians, it also means Native Hawaiians, Pacific Islanders, and other groups that are Native Americans within the construct of federal law. The Hawaiians are a very large group, very large. Okay. Having said that, does anybody have if you have questions now, please raise your hands. And if you need to go, also you're certainly welcome to get up if you need to go on.
So you're speaking about this relations, and are you talking about the Indian, Miami's in Indiana, or are you talking about are you also including Oklahoma?
I'm talking about the Indiana.
Have they been as active in Oklahoma or not?
Well, it wouldn't be fair of me to say I don't really know. Although at Miami University in Ohio, there's a Miami Indian department, and both tribes are well represented there. There are over 20 people who get a free education at Miami University in Miami. But I can't really, I don't know much about I've been to Oklahoma, and I know the Oklahoma people. I'm going to really say they are federally recognized, yes.
When they went to Oklahoma, what percentage of Oklahoma stayed here?
What percentage went to Oklahoma and stayed in Indiana? It was about roughly half and half. But what happened was a lot of people who were taken to Oklahoma didn't like it there, and they walked back to Indiana. They walked back to Indiana. The Miami tribe is about, you guys correct me if I'm tribe is perhaps 3 times as large as Oklahoma.
Yeah.
About here in Indiana. And the other thing about Indiana is folks here in Indiana who've been here for generations, who are still here today, are in the same situation. They keep the same. And the Oklahoma people do tend to be frustrated because they are around Oklahoma and they're not around the home country, you might say. There's a little resentment. So I hope that. Okay. Any other questions? Are we still in history? Are we in, I guess this is still history, isn't it? It's history now. I've been going to Germany for about 6 years, talks on American Indians, because the Germans are so fascinated. And the audiences there to talk with because they don't have the background that the average has. Americans know a lot about our Native American Indians, okay? They've got the stereotype, and you're constantly dealing with, out in the Great Plains. But you folks know the complexity of these situations. And I was at a casino of the Ho-Chunk Nation out in Wisconsin a few years ago, and there's a lady, I took $20 in quarters, I'm just testing out the slot machines. And I lost my money, of course. And I looked at her, and she said, you know what, if I lose, I'm helping the Indians. Well, that's a nice yes, sir.
Could you benefits to the Miami people if they get the federal recognition in Peru solely? How would that benefit them? Could you tell them?
Well, I can just give you some basics. There would be a health clinic. There would be some support for activity. Tribes usually have a judicial, like a JP court type of thing. I really feel a little uncomfortable talking about this because, correct me, my idea you may not be up to date with what the Miami who are sitting right here now.
Well, right now, the tribe is going after state recognition also. This recognition does also different avenues and opportunities for the tribes to try to availability of help. Because we're state recognized, that's not happening. We can't get from the center right now for that. We have a program or some study, which I believe I housed the commission about 3 room, and we done studies on that. I believe at that time there was around a program that could exercise, not necessarily be granted, but have the opportunity to at least file submissions for these programs and keep federal money available. If so, we were state recognized.
So that's significant, the state recognition. Yeah.
We, as you mentioned before, we can't on the federal level. We don't have any ability. It's by progression, it's by Congress to do it. We don't have the support. As long as they won't support their own people, then we don't have the support of DC ever. So we exist, but we're going to go after the state to go get this other opportunity. We can still provide benefits for our tribes.
And this is the Miami. Just keep going on things. And Brian may die, but someone else is going to take his place and we'll keep so Miami and I want to go there. And that's sad. I'll be more cooperative because you're on the state Indian Commission and so on. And it sounds, as my friend in Ohio, we're still in a colonial situation here where certain people have and the Indians are and acknowledged a little bit, but not in real terms.
We actually filed with promise in April that some study community hearing that was denied.
It was denied.
Yes. We do have some friends at the Senate and legislative levels that are still going to continue in behalf of our cause. So we're going to file it in January coming up. You'll see what will happen.
That's being nice, isn't it?
Absolutely, and it's long. I think Maryland and Carolyn can say as long as we're going to just keep pushing on until somebody opens their eyes.
I need, thank you, Brian. I need to mention and acknowledge Marilyn Rumsey, who's been on the council 32 years.
Yes.
And Marilyn is with Mississippi Battlefield Association funding this book, which I, as an author, and Marilyn and Beth Glenn, who died last Christmas, she was very sick, but we're so appreciative. It really helped. And this is up to date. In many ways, but also focuses on Miami and a little bit on the Pig and Puddle border of Michigan. So, just likes this little book here. And Beth and I tremendously that help from your organization. Other thoughts? Questions?
There are large funds in Washington to help
Well, the awards after the World War II, the claims awards, awards are times made, but then the government shuts the door on the Indians off and says, well, you took we don't want to have any more to do with you. And Congress said back in 1993, the policy is not to terminate any tribes, in other words, not to recognize their treaty rights. The executive branch of the government since 1970 has said termination is a dead duck here. We're going to give self-determination to tribes. So, this is an anomaly of a treaty tribe, the only tribe that has federal recognition terminated, and the people have been confused over decades about this. Goes one way and that goes the other. I don't know if it's the federal. I want to make a commercial announcement now, and that is that we have an undertaker here, and he says he's retired. His name is sitting right here through Roback, and his mom was swung under. And I think you were the youngest, weren't you? No, I have 2 sisters younger. 2 sisters younger, okay. And that's a pretty. I'm joking because we don't need undertakers, right? Okay. About there's a real big Miami meeting over at Peru High School, Miami headquarters. I heard that a very lovely old gentleman that I became with named Rosa had died. You guys know Homer, right? And I was sad about this because Homer, he was but I always grieve when someone meeting, and I looked and I saw Homer sitting. I was so startled. Here's what I did. I walked right to him and I said, Homer, I heard you died. And he laughed. He said, I didn't die, but I knew this meeting was important, so I came back. Is there this connection between the spirit world and the spirit path here? And indeed, again, on the positive side, I will say that those answers are so important, and they are always the back after the Miami people. So that energy is included as. So it's a different looking at things, and I think a very wonderful way of looking at things. Well, any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
When you do Clarence Godfrey's stories,
Yes.
was that the
Yes, it
book?
was.
Do you know if that's still in print or?
Yes, I believe her daughter keeps that print. And her was a minister, I believe, just who lives in Wabash. Okay, Ira McClure, okay, yeah. This is a topic of Indian locations in Wabash, Miami. Is a cemetery at White's Institute, just down 15 and you turn east. White's Institute for Orphans and Children, Indians years, and it's still going today. There's a cemetery that has burials of children from mainly the Rosebud Reservation in South Dakota. And they were sent by the government here for an education among the Quakers. And died, and there's this little cemetery. I'm not years to know what condition it's in, but if you go, there's a little cemetery right here in Wabash County. Isn't that interesting? A very famous person graduated to Indian person. Her name in English was Gertrude Bonin or Zikalasha in Lakota. She graduated from White's Institute. Her mom wanted her to get education, so she came to called the land of red apples here in Wabash County. I remember the red apple inn around. She came here for an education. She graduated. She was a very good woman. She was second in the Indiana oratorical contest. She went on to the New England Conservatory of Music. She was a very fine woman. She taught at the Carlisle Indian School, where many Miami people were taken to Carlisle, Kansas, back in the late 1900s. She became an activist, and she tried to help in the 1930s. She died in 1937, Gertrude Bonin. She was known Indian activist in Indiana. I had, my grandmother had went to that. Her name was Della Reed. When I was a kid, the Indian interest, she told me about White's Institute. She said Sioux made her embroidered Indian dress, and she told stories of being among Indian children. She married a doctor later on. I met her as a child. She talked about being a student at White's Institute. Something that really grabbed my attention. Indian sites, the rivers, of course, the museum has a wonderful rivers in Wabash County, and I know, John, you were at the beginning of the film talking about there's the Miami cemeteries around, and several cemeteries, Forest Cemetery. there are some, not maybe from Miami, they earlier times where to help with their fishing, where the fish and area could be taken out of baskets and so on. Over in Miami County, the Wabash said Wabash, she said Wabash, and from Miami Wabash she'd be white. Okay, Wabash is white. The river, Springs Memorial where the 1820 treaty was signed, and said, "You're asking us for the land as what the Creator gave us, and you're asking us for the land." Look, is the French name, and it means the fat one. Okay? And some of the chiefs in those very fat, like Gabriel Burnett, huge. I suspect that LeGros was a big person, and Chief was a very large man. His rocking chair was 2 meters. But as a young man, he was a racer. And I think you need to do a little I've said all I can say today, and I want to thank